In this video, I have a conversation with Dr. Jesse Morse, who is a sports medicine physician, and he reports on sports injuries like this all the time from NFL players and other sports. But we talk about Kadarius Toney and his knee surgery, as well as his timeline to return, Joe Burrow's injury today, Jalen Ramsey's injury today, as well as Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So let's talk about it. But first, how about those? I'm here with Dr. Jesse Morse, a sports medicine physician specializing in knee, hip, and shoulder injuries. And you're also part of the Fantasy Doctors, which is the #1 source for sports injuries and analysis. I've seen a lot of your stuff. The reason why we're talking right now is Kadarius Toney tweaked his knee, first day of Chiefs training camp, ended up having some surgery, and you said you'd love a little clarity on it. You commented on one of my Twitter posts, and I just shot you a DM, and I was like, hey man, you're way smarter than me in regards to injuries. I'd love to just chat briefly about Kadarius Toney and projected timeline, especially considering, from what I can tell, this is a re-aggravation of an injury he did have surgery on in 2022 when he was with the Giants. It sounds like it's a re-aggravation and a surgery on the same knee. So I'd love to get your thoughts, and if the intro wasn't sufficient enough, let me know. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that and the situation and what you think maybe a projected timeline for Toney could potentially be. Andy Reid made it seem like he could be ready for week 1, but I'm kind of skeptical myself of that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, man, just as a professional who's in the field and kind of deals with this all the time.
Yeah, so thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, he did re-injure that meniscus. He did have a similar injury. We don't know the details of it, but it was likely a minor meniscal tear sometime in 21, and eventually had surgery in the offseason of 20, heading into 22. And then, he did pretty good last year, obviously dealt with his fair share of injuries, got shipped off to you guys in KC, made some scary plays when he has his hands on the ball. He's dynamic. Unfortunately, he relatively struggled to stay healthy. And then he tweaked it. We initially thought, hey, he had an off-season meniscal surgery. It sounds like that wasn't necessarily true. And the only surgery he ended up having was the one he took a picture and IG'd it yesterday or whatever day it was. Unfortunately, think of the meniscus, and I have my little model here just because I'm a visual guy. The meniscus is basically two half moons, kind of like this. They sit in the front, but they insert in the back. So the problem with them is they only the outer edge, and it's only about 1 millimeter or 2 that actually gets a good blood supply. So that's the only area that heals. But the problem is they go all the way in a relatively circular, and then the middle part doesn't really have much meniscus. And then the outer portion, the lateral portion, it basically does the same thing. So if you were to think of what does a meniscus do, it's essentially the shock absorbers for your knee. It's like if you were to take a car and one of the rims, you would remove the shocks. And if you hit a bump with the good tire, okay, whatever, you hit a bump with the shockless one, you're going to feel it. That's kind of the problem. It's also very important for any twisting, so pivoting, like getting out of your car, that kind of pivot. And it's also vital for changes of elevation. So like grass, sand, anything that's uneven is classic meniscus. And then when you squat, just like regular squatting, not with any weight, the pressure in your knee goes up 700%, 7x. So, and if you tear your meniscus, it's going to be even, more dramatic. Think of it as almost like a piece of paper. And this is likely what happened in 21 or maybe even in college. And what happened was he tore it a little bit. So if it calms down and it's flat, great. But what happens when you keep twisting on it? Or what happens if it flips up? Then what can happen is you can tear a piece of it. Now you have that floating inside of the knee, and the knee is a big balloon. It's not going anywhere. So now it catches, it locks, it causes swelling. And that's a lot of the times what they do is they go in and they basically will trim this out, and they basically just kind of smooth it out. But the problem is the more meniscus you remove, the more stress on the ACL and the more stress on the cartilage underneath, or what we call the articular cartilage. because you're literally removing the cushion and still expecting it to be there. So giving you an extreme example, Todd Gurley, when he had his bad ACL tear at UGA, reportedly they took out a lot of his meniscus. Well, as a result, it ended up, as he pushed through his years in the NFL, there was so much wear and tear that the arthritis developed so bad that he couldn't handle the volume week in and week out, and the arthritis developed so bad that he couldn't run anymore. And he was 26, whatever. He was young. He was still young. That's what can happen if you remove a significant portion. So it sounds like Toney got relatively lucky and just had a little bit of an irritation, but unfortunately enough to require some removal. Usually they're not going to repair it, like possibly what Jalen Ramsey might have to go through, because those sutures take a long time to heal. Sometimes they don't really ever heal. Usually it's around 6 months. So that obviously is a significant timeline. But if it's a significant tear, if it's ginormous, like a huge tear, it's just too risky. It will be sliding all over the place. You're just begging for a problem. So those guys usually end up undergoing repairs. That's also reportedly what happened to Kyler. Supposedly he had a pretty bad meniscal tear as well. So the best case scenario is that it calms down. He gets back on the field in about 3 weeks or so, and then he really starts to ramp up. Maybe he makes it week 1. Maybe they're a little extra cautious with him. I think you guys' depth is bananas at this point. I mean, there's just guys upon guys. Rice looks great. Sky Moore looks great. You will obviously see who else is going to shake out. Is MBS going to be the guy, or is he's going to hand the keys to Justin Ross? I mean, we don't really know. Obviously, Kelsey's there.
Hey, your Chiefs? Okay.
I know. I'm a fantasy guy, so I know all the rosters, unfortunately. But yeah, so it's an unfortunate injury. The problem is when you have a meniscal tear like that, it's almost like it just can continue to tear a little bit because think of all the cutting and route running, and then you add in the turf fields and the normal fields and the divots, and the guys getting cut blocked and whatever. So, you might see this slowly start to bother him more and more over the year or years. And sometimes that's eventually what ends up causing these guys to slow down and eventually not be able to play, at least to the same level that you want them to. So it's just it's the nature of the beast, but it's unfortunate.
So you're talking even after this surgery that he just had. You're not necessarily just saying if you just leave it, you could deal with these issues later. You're saying even after a surgery like this, you could start dealing with aggravation and re-aggravation. Am I hearing that correctly?
It's possible. That's essentially what happened kind of here.
Yes.
Most ideally, he gets scoped, everything works out perfectly, and it doesn't bother him for 5 years. Best case scenario. But would it surprise me if he had an issue in a year or so? Wouldn't surprise me. Unfortunately, you've already started that process of removing, and therefore now you have less meniscus to handle the same amount of stress. So, and if he was a lineman not doing a whole lot of physical moving, all right, a little bit different story. He's running routes, cutting on a dime, trying to shimmy. Like, that's going to take a lot more stress on that meniscus, and he needs to be explosive. Hard for him to do that if that meniscus isn't super happy. When the meniscus is angry or you tear it, the body naturally pulls in fluid to try to protect it or help it. It doesn't do much, but it ends up causing more problems. And that's when guys feel like I can't do it because my knee hurts. And then they have to figure out, I personally treat them with stem cells and, PRP and that type of stuff. But for big tears, unfortunately, that usually is probably not enough because you kind of need to tack it back down. But in the future, I would not be surprised if he was more preventative and decided to go that route to see if he can tack that meniscus back down on maybe inside and outside so that he can kind of preserve whatever he has left and continue to prevent it from tearing, further. That would be the mental approach I would describe to him.
Yeah, and I'm a little worried since this seems like it's potentially the same knee because Toney tweeted out, and I DM'd you the photo of his Instagram story. He said a re-aggravation, old injury. And he goes on to say some other stuff. But like, it sounds like he re-aggravated the same knee he had surgery on. It's not the first time. And then I'm already, even before this was, I'm already concerned about Toney's knees and ankles because he's got that Dante Hall like movement as far as how he shifts and jukes, and it's very effective, but it's can't be easy. It's not natural, and it's not easy on the joints. Is it potentially a good sign? I just think if we're going to compare, like, 2 injuries happened today, Jalen Ramsey and then Joe Burrow is a big one, but we don't know exactly what's going on there. Hopefully it's just a calf strain. To what degree, I don't know. You could weigh in on that if you want. But like, I saw the report of Jalen Ramsey. He not only was down, but he was hobbling around and had to get carted off. Meanwhile, Toney, he tweaked it on a punt return during warmups, and he actually reportedly stayed on the sideline with his helmet on during practice, and there wasn't like a noticeable limp or anything. Is that a little bit of a positive sign for you, for Toney, that it could be less of a tear or less of a big deal?
Yeah, and the way he's describing it, the timeline they gave basically tells me it's on the milder side. Okay. Ramsey's initially, they said, hey, 8 to 9 weeks, which is a weird timeline. And then there's him commenting, hey, the end of the season or something like that is going to be strong, or however he worded it. That tells me that may be a repair. Repairs take up to 6 months, and at best, relatively normal. That I wouldn't be surprised if that season ending, if he has a setback or something isn't healing. So that, and you could see the dramatic difference between the two in terms of how they present it. When you have something called a bucket handle, which is basically what it looks like, the meniscus is almost in 2 pieces. It's literally like hanging. It's really those you have to repair. I mean, you remove 50% of it of the meniscus if you didn't. So that if it's that way, you can't put weight on your knee. Your knee will lock. You can't lock it out. So it's basically flipped over on itself. If that happened, A, he's going to be in a ton of pain, and B, he won't be able to put his leg down. Or if he does, he's going to be miserable. If that happened with Ramsey, that would correlate with a significant knee injury, unfortunately. And then they have to repair. I mean, it's in his best interest to repair it if he wants to have a career more than a year or 2. And if he wants to be able to preserve the integrity of the ACL, as long as he can, because there's a direct correlation between the two. You asked about Burrow. I watched the video. I actually did my own little video on it. The fascinating thing is if you look at yesterday's video, he didn't have a sleeve on his right calf.
Yes.
If you look at today's video, he did, which means he injured it yesterday.
Did you see the coach's interview on that? Not to cut you off, but okay, so Zach Taylor, he did say Burrow today, his calf before practice was feeling a bit sore. And so that's why he had a sleeve on it. That was per the words of Zach Taylor in his presser.
So and that basically means if you threw it, one of my specialties is ultrasound. That's like what I do. If you threw an ultrasound on that, which they might have, you will see soft tissue changes, which is translation grade 1 strain. Or if there wasn't any soft tissue changes, that's him telling the body telling him, hey, I'm not happy. The problem with the gastroc, or the 2 muscles on the back of your leg, is that those are your explosive. Those are what propel you. So the problem is whenever you fire your leg, that fires and pulls up the Achilles. You can't not use it, even to walk. I mean, you don't have a choice. So a calf, even if you put a compression on it, it's not going to prevent you from pulling it. It's not going to prevent you from firing. It needs to fire if you want to function. And the other problem is the gastroc has a very poor blood supply in a couple areas, which is why it's notorious for taking forever to heal. And that's another relative concern. If it's only a grade 1 and there's no injury to the Achilles, I still don't think we'll see him in the preseason, but you won't see him for 2-3 weeks minimum. If this is a grade 2, week 1 may be in doubt, may be a possibility. Like it may, when our start for week 1, and we're only 6-ish weeks away or so, because grade 2s are bad. They're annoying. They're frustrating. And the problem is if you re-injure it, it lingers and lingers. And so you don't want, this is early. We don't want to linger until, November or whatever. So, in that regard, they have to be careful. If it's only, which is what you want, only a calf strain, it's not a cramp. It's not a cramp. It's definitely a strain. And you don't want any injury to the Achilles. That's best case scenario. You want a grade 1. You want him to be out a couple weeks, it heal up appropriately, and he doesn't have any setbacks is when the season starts. That's best case scenario for Burrow.
The Bengals are probably the Chiefs' biggest rival in the AFC right now. And while we get into it with fans back and forth on social, at the end of the day, I want nothing more than all these players to be healthy. So seeing that from Burrow, I did not like seeing that one bit. Do you have any concern there that it could, without you seeing scans and all that, could it be his Achilles? It's kind of going around.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's the opposite side of his ACL, and his ACL was bad. But it was classic calf. That was a classic. If you were to ask, that's what they look like. That's what they look like.
Okay.
If it was his Achilles, which is better than Achilles. If it was Achilles, they usually grab lower on the and while I couldn't see the video directly because there was someone standing kind of where he was during the play, you usually see a recoil because there's so much tension from the Achilles that attaches to the heel that when you tear it, it like gunshots up, and sometimes you can hear it. And I just don't think, and they basically said it was a calf strain. So far, I'm assuming, I wouldn't even be surprised if they had ultrasound will tell you in 20 seconds, but and then an MRI will confirm everything you want to know. But I'm not as worried about Achilles, but until they say, yes, it's 100% calf and the Achilles is fine, I can't completely take a deep breath.
I mean, based on him saying his calf was sore for day 2, and that's why he had a sleeve on, I hope that's all it is. Like Achilles, that's season ending, I would think, at minimum. So. But the calf, it's a little more hopeful. It's 3 big injuries that we've seen just kind of within a week. So you got Toney, you've got Ramsey, and then Burrow today. I mean, I was like, man, this is just training camp. Garrett Wilson, I didn't see that one. Him too?
He sprained his ankle really well. At the minimum, laterally. I need to make sure he didn't suffer a fracture in his foot. We haven't heard much.
I didn't even see that.
He was running a route up the left seam. He came back, and the way he landed, his foot, like his foot was down here and his leg was up here. Like it was literally like not vertical anymore. And what can happen is that fifth can roll underneath. And when that happens, we cause a Jones fracture, which is a base of the fifth, that's what Henry did a couple years ago. You need you need a screw in it. You can't play without it. They don't heal. So that would be, I wouldn't say worst case scenario, but that would be pretty bad. My suspicion is just a lateral ankle sprain. Best case scenario, he probably misses a week or a couple days. These days are important, but not that important. Not where they start questioning week 1.
So dang, Garrett Wilson too, worst case, could be out for a while. Hopefully it's not worst case.
Yeah.
I guess before we get out of here, I'd love to, even if it's a 20, 30-second answer, would love to hear your thoughts on when Mahomes sprained his ankle in the divisional, what your initial thoughts were there, and then were you surprised just how he was able to perform going all the way into the Super Bowl, and even like the re-aggravation of it, him writhing in pain on the field at the Super Bowl right before halftime. I would love to just hear your thoughts on that as a doctor and somebody who knows a lot more than me in that regard.
Yes. So high ankle sprains suck. Period. End of story. No question. They are much more complicated than a traditional lateral. It's basically a combination between this ligament and then these two, which if you look at it from a higher perspective is basically the ligament that holds these two together. The problem is they're rotational injuries, which means if you're trying to pivot and rotate, that's when you feel it the most. Even grade 1s, people hurt to put your foot down to put weight on it. Never mind function, just even putting your weight on it. We often hear that guys take up to 6 months. I think Kamara was quoted saying this in the past, to finally feel 100%. And that's no joke. That's legit. I've seen guys 10, 12 weeks later and still having bruising and swelling inside of the tissue on ultrasound. Like it's bad. So you can wrap it tight. It doesn't last that long if you wrap it, obviously, but you can kind of push through. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not completely 100% yet. He might, it's probably like 95, but I would not be surprised if it says, I'm not quite 100%, and it's something sometimes you just kind of have to manage. I personally inject the entire seam and then around the joint line, and it really reinforces and kind of tightens things up. Surgery, which a lot of guys have had, you basically put a tightrope, we call it, through here and kind of puts it through here, and it kind of tightens it together. Jalen's had two, Tua's had two, Thielen's had them, a bunch of guys have had them. And unfortunately, they're relatively common in NFL. But after that, you don't really worry about them anymore. But if you don't have that, then that tissue sometimes is just never the same. So best case scenario, he's 100%. We didn't hear about a surgery. I don't know if he had one.
He didn't have one.
We can just hope that everything is perfect. But the fact that he was able to push through was super impressive.
I definitely thought when the injury happened in the divisional, I was like, the Chiefs are awesome, but Mahomes leads the ship, man. So shout out to Henne for leading the 98-yard drive and scoring the TD. Like, that was freaking awesome. Helped win the game. But I was definitely worried. The fact that he pushed through, he won. I was mind blown in the best way possible. Lifelong Chiefs fan. It's absolutely incredible. He did say in a recent presser, even during OTAs, as far as his ankle goes, he was being careful. He said training camp is now the time. This is the time where he feels confident, where he can kind of move however. And all the videos I've seen, he's moving pretty freely every direction. Yeah. Talking about Mahomes, moving freely every direction, sprinting around, running, and seems okay. But yeah, I'll be curious to see when you start really putting it under game time pressure, how he does. And I hope it's, hope it's the best that we can possibly hope for, which is 98% or 100% if you can get back there. So
the game's not the same without him, and with him less than 100%, but he has that spirit where he's not going to come off the field unless he can't, unless he can't go.
Did you watch any of the quarterback documentary?
No, I'm in the process of, I'm going to start it.
Okay. I know you're busy.
I haven't, and I wasn't trying to decide if it was worth it, and it sounds like it is.
Oh man, he did not want to go out, and Andy Reid just wanted him to X-ray it, before halftime, just to make sure nothing was broken. But he did he spoke in an interview yesterday, Andy Reid, and he said if we would have let him, if it was worse, like Mahomes would have played on a broken leg, like he would have just went out there.
That's his mentality, 100%.
I saw a clip. There's a clip on quarterback. Brittany Mahomes' wife said he needs to get out of there. This was after he scored a touchdown in the divisional. Second half, I think it was the divisional. It might have been the AFC Championship game. But he threw a touchdown pass and he could barely get up, and he was hobbling off the field. Brittany Mahomes said he needs to get out of there. And Pat Mahomes, his father, said, it's not going to happen. It's not in his DNA. He's not getting out of the game. And I just thought it was so...
that's how a lot of these guys are. They're just not going out unless they can't, literally, they can't go.
We went over on our time, but I appreciate it. Thank you for answering these questions, Jesse, and I appreciate it. What's the best way that people can stay connected and be able to see updates like this for when players get injured? They know, I want to go here and get an update.
So three places in terms of written content. Twitter's my primary at Dr. Jesse Morris. Some of the stuff may be on the Fantasy Doctors or DRS account. A lot of our stuff goes on YouTube, the same name, and then if you're TikTok, we just shorten it for that. We have some Instagram. I'm not a big Instagram guy, but I think we put some on there. And then we do, once the season starts, we'll have a ton of content on our website. Right now, it's kind of quiet because everything hasn't completely been bananas yet. So we have a lot of stuff, and then I do a deep dive for fantasy guys. I do a deep dive into all the injuries and kind of match it with the analytics and kind of give you a really deep mindset of why you should target or avoid someone. If you want to know more, it's on my pinned tweet. I call it the Injury Draft Guide.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll plug all those. And I guess last question before we get off then, if you were answering a fantasy question about Kadarius Toney, when would you potentially predict him to be back for fantasy?
I think realistically, week 1 or 2 is probably realistic, unless they're really conservative and they put him on the pup. Those are the two options in my head. Either he's ready for week 1 or week 2, or they're putting him on the PUP and they're not rushing him. Those are likely the most 2 scenarios.
Perfect. And well, not perfect, but perfect answer in the sense of, for those of you who are watching the PUP, he'd be out 4 weeks minimum, 21-day window would open and he could come back. But I think it sounds like they're trying to avoid that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So
and he's early enough where I think he can.
Yeah, that's the hope. And even when he comes back, it's like, I feel like they're just he's not going to be a full go. They'll ease him in on a snap count, I would assume. And
that's
try
the
to
problem with him in
up.
fantasy. You got to be really careful when you don't even know when to start him.
Well, Jesse, I appreciate all your time, Dr. Jesse, and thanks for all your input and all that you're doing. And it was great to meet you virtually. And thanks for weighing in on all these things. It's part of the game. It's a brutal sport, and it sucks, especially during training camp when they're not even, it's just practice, basically. So I hate to see it, but I really appreciate your input and wish you nothing but the best with your patients that you're working with, but also just all the stuff you're doing, covering sports and NFL in general, and just appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice time. Take care.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, make sure to like and sub for more content like this. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?